if that child knows that he's a boy and like he understands that and his parents are just like, yeah, just remember you're a boy. I understand the whole bullying thing you were talking about, but wouldn't it confuse the child more if you say, hey, you can't do these things because these are specifically girl things, even though this child who's a boy and realizes he's a boy?
No, so my feeling is that as a parent, and a parent of young kids, that it is my job to educate my kids about life. It is not my job to let my children make autonomous decisions about which they know nothing, because kids are really stupid. We all sort of accept that there is a binary dress code, at least to a certain extent, in terms of how boys and girls dress. And if you want to confuse your child, then the best thing to do is take a 6-year-old kid and say to them, yeah, go ahead and wear a dress to school. And you know, I don't feel like I'm discriminating against my 2.5-year-old son when I offer him another option or when I encourage him to take that other option.
Ben Shapiro argued that parents should guide their children instead of letting them make independent decisions about gender roles. He believes children lack the maturity to fully understand these complexities and suggests that reinforcing traditional gender norms helps provide clearer guidance.
And if I call you a moose, are you suddenly a moose? Okay, if I redefine our terms. No, yes, that's right. Men and women are a completely different thing. This is true. Have you ever met a man or a woman? They're completely different.
Completely different thing. You can't say you're a cat. It's not a thing. It's genders. It's not saying you're.
Okay, why is that? I don't understand. Why? Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are. Okay, because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22.
Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just.
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
Ben Shapiro explained that while gender and sex are often confused, they are distinct and immutable. Using the example of age, he emphasized that redefining terms like gender doesn't change inherent differences, arguing that identity cannot simply shift based on personal declarations.
Before I ask my question, so do you come from Holocaust survivors, or are you a Jewish family that didn't?
So my great-great-grandparents arrived here. A lot of our extended family was killed in the Holocaust, but our immediate
your
family.
Your great-great-grandparents, but not your grandparents.
Right.
Oh, do you have friends whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors or anything like that?
Of course, many of them. Yeah, I've helped write memoirs of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah. Their families are kind of messed up, right? Like, my family is very messed up.
I mean, if you go through a trauma like the Holocaust, I would imagine
they teach that trauma between generations. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, trauma very often in a lot of circumstances is passed down. I mean, I know some kids of Holocaust survivors who turned out fantastic and some who didn't. I mean,
yeah. Okay, so you are officially woke. That is what wokeness is about. It's like, you know, people's grandparents or their great-grandparents were slaves.
Well, it's okay. No, it's okay. Guys,
Fuck you! I'm talking.
Guys, I actually want to hear. I want to hear.
No,
it's okay. It's okay. I want to hear. Let's at least hear the argument. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Go.
What? He wants to hear me.
I do want to hear it. It's fine. Let him go. Let's hear it.
Come on. So
explain how that's woke.
So I mean, the whole thing is like, let's see. So during Silent Calvin Coolidge's administration, do you know about like the Great Mississippi Flood back in the 1930s?
I understand that American history is filled with racial evil.
Yeah. And that causes some intergenerational trauma, which affects people's ability to be,
so let me
effective, things like that.
Fine. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So if the idea is that history has consequences, of course that's true. That's not wokeness.
Yeah.
That is not wokeness. What wokeness suggests is that fundamental institutions in American society
are so... No, it doesn't.
Yes, it 100% does.
I ran Elizabeth Warren's campaign. I helped organize her volunteers around here. I am a representative of wokeness.
Okay, well,
and that's just, this is all it is.
Well, I mean,
when I went to go get my first tattoo, the guy had lightning bolts and 88s tattooed on his neck. And as a Jewish person, that's really messed up. It's basically a threat.
There are racist people who exist. The argument that you're making, and I'm going to close with this because this is going in weird directions.
During a debate, Ben Shapiro and a student clashed over the concept of wokeness. The student argued that historical traumas, such as those experienced by Holocaust survivors, still influence society today. Shapiro, however, argued that wokeness distorts historical context by focusing too much on past injustices.
I don't really want to.
No, it's not.
I don't really want to get. No, just hold up a second. I let you get out your arguments, and now it's time for me to respond because I let you say
okay,
before.
I'll let you respond, but
no, not but. Now's my turn.
You are not characterizing what I'm saying accurately.
Now it's my turn. Your definition is inaccurate. The reason your definition is inaccurate is because any sentient human being would acknowledge that history has consequences.
Right.
But if the idea is, but that's not what wokeism is. Wokeism is a different thing. Wokeism suggests that all inequalities of today are attributable to not only historic injustices, but also continuing injustices in the now. And that all disparity is attributable to discrimination.
Like that, but a conservative.
Not just
a conservative is the only person. I want to know why. Why is it that conservatives are the only people who define it like that? Why are conservatives the only people?
Okay, so we're gonna have to stop here because this is going nowhere. But
what's up?
I'm gonna have to stop with this with you because this is going nowhere. All I'm going to say is this. To sum up,
I just am trying to understand your perspective. Just one more second. On a fundamental level, you're shifting definitions to avoid the consequences of your own argument. And if the idea is, and final point, if you are going to hold on, if you are also, just final point to sum up there. Final point to sum.
I can follow that.
Yeah, I just want to make, honestly, I want to make one final point to sum up there. If the idea is that traumas of the past invariably bleed down into the present, that does not explain why certain groups that have been historically not only marginalized but slaughtered in mass genocide are some of the most successful groups in our society. So if the idea is, that past trauma always equals current inequality, or that my actions in, say, robbing a convenience store are attributable to bad actions that happened in Alabama in 1930, the answer to that is no. Don't rob the convenience store. The only way they are going to be able to break the chain of history is to make good decisions. What people on the left don't like to talk about is actual solutions. What they like to do is bitch about problems that existed 60 years ago and blame those for failures to solve them now.
The debate intensified as the student insisted on the relevance of historical trauma to current social issues. Shapiro argued that addressing modern problems requires practical solutions, not simply blaming historical grievances.
Hello, my name is Quentin Merritt. I'm a mathematician and a physicist here, a double major, and I also just won the most prestigious award in the country to pursue research at any institution I want, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. So I think I'm pretty, qualified to say that most of what you're saying is based on old data. But my question to you, and so I want you all to realize that.
Last month, but sure.
For example, gender identity disorder, that's the DSM-4, bro. We use the DSM-5 now for psychologists to be able to talk about...
I literally cited the DSM-5 in the speech, and it's called gender dysphoria, which is a term that I use throughout the speech, not gender identity disorder.
You sound like a bozo, bro. And you get no pussy, and you can't even make your wife wet, bro, so what's good?
So, let me just say, the nice thing about having several small children, I don't feel the necessity to have my masculinity
challenged. If we're using a Western
like
colonial idea of gender, then why should it apply? If we're using, because the gender binary is a Western colonialist framework of gender.
You're right. Men and women don't exist in any other culture.
No. Think about Native American. Third gender people. I'm not saying that. Third gender people exist in Native American societies, Western African societies, like Southern Native American societies, like Mexico. So in other places that are not white dominated,
and they
like the United States or
incorrect.
Europe, and so you're saying white, so non-white people. I'm a mathematician and a physicist. You cannot tell me.
So I have a question.
And also, you're not a biologist.
So I have a question.
I'm 20.
As a mathematician and a physicist, what in the hell do you know about human biology?
And you got your law degree from Harvard. What do you know about biology? You got your law degree from Harvard.
And frankly, I would ask another question. If your logic is so flawed as a mathematician and a physicist, I would suggest that whichever institution gave you an award, revoke it immediately.
In a heated debate, a student challenged Ben Shapiro's views, claiming that the gender binary is a Western colonial concept. Shapiro dismissed this idea, defending the traditional gender binary and emphasizing its historical presence in many cultures worldwide.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I just had a question about a comment you made at the beginning about transitioning from male to female or otherwise.
Yes.
You've talked a lot tonight about how important it is to let people believe what they want to believe and how the government and us have no say telling people what they should think or what they should be able to say. I just wanted to ask, what's the harm, you know, if somebody's going to be a happier person because they say that they're a man or a woman, like what's the harm in just letting them do it?
I'm not in favor of government banning people who are adults. Children I'm in favor of banning because now you're talking about somebody who's not capable of consent. Right? All of our laws are based on the ability of people to consent. If you're a child, you can't consent. So I'm very much in favor of banning gender transition for kids. I think that it's frankly evil. I think you're making decisions for children who are not capable of making decisions for themselves that are permanent and have long-lasting, significant, and severe impact. As far as adults, if you're 25 and you want to get a sex change surgery and you feel like it's going to make you feel better, you have the right to do it. You do. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I mean, the research on this stuff tends to be somewhat conflicting, but if it works for you, it works, right? It's a free country. Now, that's really not the question that's being asked in our society today, because I don't think there are that many people who are like, we want to ban gender surgery for a 30-year-old. I'm not seeing the campaign for that. What I am seeing is a campaign on the left that says that my child is going to be removed from my home 10 years from now if I don't agree with the left's view of how I should treat my child's gender confusion at age 4. I see the left suggesting that they want to fine me if I refuse to say that a man is a woman as a general proposition. Right? If I say that men and women are separate, then the left says this is discrimination. Or the left is going to suggest that it has no impact on my business if I employ a woman at Hooters and she shows up the next day as a man. Right? Like that does have an impact on my business, right? But the left would suggest, well, you know, you should sort of deal with it. Well, it turns out that gender does mean something, and it does have an actual meaning to people outside of you. I'm not going to go along with the general societal willingness to rewrite basic facets of human nature and human biology, and frankly, mammalian biology, in order to suggest that a delusion is true. Now, if the best thing for the person is for the person they can't change what they're thinking, there's no way for them to get out of it, they want to change their body so they feel that it is more in line with what they're thinking, more power to them, that's their problem. And as I've said before, by the way, I've said this 1,000 times and everybody on the left automatically ignores it, of course. I've said that if I were in a room with a transgender person having dinner with that person, I wouldn't go out of my way to call them by their biological sex. Because it's rude, right? I wouldn't do that if I were sitting right across from them. But if you're asking me in a public forum whether a man is a man and a woman is a woman, or asking me to call a man a woman in a public forum, the answer is no.
Ben Shapiro addressed the issue of gender transition, arguing that while adults have the freedom to transition, children are not mature enough to consent to such permanent changes. He stressed that transitioning for minors should not be allowed due to their lack of understanding.
It does seem to me that there are some things within religious scripture that do need to be taken seriously and do need to be taken essentially at face value. That is, some of the very specific legalistic commandments of the Old Testament, for example, or of the Hebrew Bible, I should say. These are not, when people list these and say that these are potentially morally problematic and may have done something towards hindering, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the abolition of slavery in the United States. Of course, there was a great deal of religious influence on both sides, which is something that I've already mentioned. But don't you think that this problem could have been solved a lot more easily if there had been a stronger religious tradition of opposition to the ownership of other human beings? Why can't that have been the case? Okay, because Scripture quite explicitly condones it. Right, and in fact gives you the details of how to do it. That's something that couldn't have been done, in other words, because you've taken
this, I get to tell me to gloss. So
this moral principle that's placed outside of meaningful debate.
Right. Before we move on, can I ask, where are we getting these buttons from? Are they from Amazon? You know, you press one and everyone's an atheist.
There's this wonderful thing that
these available on the market
that I think you both need to use in this conversation, which is imagination.
Oh, right.
So let's as far as why didn't the Bible prescribe the perfect world as I would see it, or as you might see it? And the answer is because two reasons. One, as stated right up top, I'm not God. I assume he has different logic than I do. Mm-hmm. Two, the Bible is in an inherently problematic position in the sense that, on the one hand, it's trying to divulge important truths for all time. At the same time, it's talking to a people of a particular time. Yes. And this is a well-worn tradition inside Judaism. So to take the slavery example, there is no mandate to hold slaves in the Bible. Right? There are lots of mandates in the Bible. Many, many mandates. There are 613 of them according to my religion, right? That's why I do all these weird things that I do. But one of those mandates is not to hold slaves. Right? And so the idea of there was a society that existed at the time of the Bible in which slaveholding was not only ubiquitous, it was universal, and which was true for virtually all of human history.
That's right.
And could be justified not just in terms of religious scripture, but in terms of Aristotelian thought. Right? I mean, the great philosophers we like to cite sometimes in the secular tradition are big fans of slavery. And that's true virtually up until the 18th century.
Yes.
So the idea would be, is this verse attempting to woo people away from a tradition of slavery or to humanize the slaves? Or is it attempting to reinforce that by making it...
In a debate with an atheist, Ben Shapiro discussed the issue of slavery in the Bible. He acknowledged that the Bible reflects its time and that slavery was common in ancient societies, but argued that its regulations on slavery were more humane compared to the other legal codes of the period.
Harsher and more difficult. And that's why actually one of the things I enjoy doing in terms of how I study the Bible, for example, is I like to look at contemporaneous religious texts of the time. So I like to study the Bible alongside, for example, Hammurabi's Code. And it's really interesting to notice the differences and where the Bible is liberalizing Hammurabi's Code, for example.
Absolutely.
And so the idea that a divine revelation has to be given to human beings who are capable of following that in the time. Again, that's part of the difficulty of I think rebutting religion in a certain sense, because again, it seems wiggly, but it really isn't, in the sense that if you believe, as I do, in a God who spoke to human beings in some form or fashion and has to speak to them on a level that they can understand, in ways they can understand, then that immediately is going to discount the ability to do a lot of very radical things that would have appeared radical in 1200 BC, but now appear to be commonplace for us.
Yes, I understand this argument, and I've heard it many times. I must say that it seems strange to me that God does seem willing to completely and utterly condemn a bunch of other practices, including, by the way, imaginary crimes like witchcraft, just done away with entirely. And even if it is the case that God, for some reason, couldn't even hint at the idea that maybe eventually we should be moving towards the abolition of the idea of owning human beings as private property, he just has to condone it. I still think it's the case that he would not permit a flat immorality, and I think you would agree with that too. And so when I open the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, and when I look at the texts saying...
Shapiro suggested that some biblical commandments, including those on slavery, were intended as gradual improvements rather than immediate abolitions, in line with the norms of the time. He noted that modern moral standards evolved from these traditions.
That if you lay siege to a city, you can kill, if the Lord delivers it into your hand, you can kill the men and the women, you can kill the men and keep the women and the children and the livestock as plunder, as Deuteronomy says. And in the very next verse, the very next chapter says that, if you see a good-looking woman, and I'm not interjecting that. If somebody finds an attractive woman,
yes, ifatoar is the actual Hebrew. Yeah.
Then they can take them for themselves, and if they want them as their wives, and they take them home, they shave their head, they cut off their fingernails, they give them 30 days to mourn their old husband, who you may very well have just killed, and then you can take them as your wife. When Numbers 31 has Moses instruct the slaughter of the Midianites, saying, kill all the men, and this time the women get killed too, but not the women who haven't slept with a man. Why might that be? And it says that, keep them for yourselves. And I hear all the time that this is some kind of liberalizing process. Maybe it's because, these people wouldn't survive on their own. It's some kind of protective measure to make sure that you're looking after them. If that's the case, then why does it only apply to the virgins? That seems a little bit suspect to me. It's sort of Scripture's littered with these kinds of
Well, again, so to go back to the sort of oral tradition nature,
and I don't think God would permit a proactive immorality, even if he can't, for some reason, abolish the practice altogether, if you see what I'm saying.
No, that last point I don't see. So when you say even if he can't abolish the practice altogether,
which already I think he would be able to do.
The debate highlighted the complexities of interpreting ancient texts in a modern context, showing how different moral standards evolve over time.
Well, how do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay. Someone's excited. Okay.
It's biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So
it's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society.
Okay. No, it is not in the mind. Okay, you're not a man if you think you're a man. And I didn't say pretending, or if I did, I shouldn't have said pretending. Let me amend.
You said playing.
Okay, I said a boy who thinks he's a girl. That's the usual phraseology I use. not playing. I usually say a boy who thinks he's a girl or a girl who thinks he's a boy, which is technically what we're talking about here. As far as the actual psychological issues at play, it used to be called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder. Now they call it gender dysphoria. The idea that sex or gender are malleable is not true. Okay? And I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be. You're still a human being, and you're a human being with an issue that I wish you Godspeed in dealing with in whatever way you see fit. But if you are going to dictate to me that I'm supposed to pretend that men are women and women are men, no. My answer is no. I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
Okay, but you're still saying these kids should not be accepted because they don't really fit in either place? They can't just
I'm saying that the Boy Scouts have a standard. You must be a biological boy to be a Boy Scout. You have to be a boy to be a Boy Scout.
Where's that written, though? Okay.
In the name Boy Scouts. Because this is a very because for all of human history, boy meant boy and girl meant girl. Boy did not mean girl. And if I call you a moose, are you suddenly a moose? Okay, if I redefine our terms.
Ben Shapiro defended his views on transgender issues and abortion during a recent debate, arguing against attempts to redefine biological sex and gender.
Yes, that's right. Men and women are a completely different thing. This is true. Have you ever met a man or a woman? They're completely different.
Completely different thing. You can't just say you're a cat. It's not a thing. It's genders. It's not saying you're.
Okay, why is that? I don't understand. Why? Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are. Okay, because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Because it.
And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
Because it's not the same as gender. You can't just.
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize.
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously, you can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do lots of things in the past that were incorrect biologically and correct legally. For a long period of time in the United States, sterilization of the mentally ill took place. That didn't make it okay. Skinner versus Oklahoma. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision.
Right. I still don't understand how you're accepting these children that are.
It's not a matter of open-minded and accepting. I want them to get treatment that they see fit, but that's not involving me. The idea behind the transgender movement as a civil rights movement is the idea that all of their problems would just go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim membership. That's nonsense. The transgender suicide rate is 40%. It is 40%. And according to the Anderson School at UCLA, it makes no difference. There's a study that came out last year. It makes no difference, virtually no difference, statistically speaking, as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not, which suggests there's a very high comorbidity between transgenderism, whatever that mental state may be, and suicidality. That has nothing to do with how society treats you.
Do you think it could be because of they're bullied at school?
No, I don't think that. I do not think that the discrepancy. I do not think the discrepancy. First of all, I'm against bullying of any sort. Okay, the idea that somebody would beat somebody up is terrible. Okay, as somebody who's viciously bullied in high school, I'm not a fan of bullying. But the idea that the normal suicide rate across the United States is 4%. The suicide rate in the transgender community is 40%. The idea that 36% more transgender people are committing suicide because people are mean to them is ridiculous.
Shapiro described gender dysphoria as a serious psychological issue, but argued that societal acceptance should not change fundamental biological truths.
It's not true, and it's not backed by any science that anyone can cite. It is pure conjecture. In fact, it's not even true that bullying causes suicide, according to a lot of studies. For example, in the black community, where the idea is supposedly that America is a racist society, blacks are bullied a lot. Okay, in the black community has significantly lower suicide rates than in the white community. In fact, in third world countries, the suicide rate is significantly lower than in first world countries. Suicide actually seems to be a privilege of the upper classes, if you actually look at it from a financial perspective. So the idea that suicidality is directly a result of people like me saying, no, men are not women and women are not men. it's not true. It's also...
So you think it doesn't impact their identity at all, or their depression, or how they feel about themselves?
I think the idea that you're going to sacrifice the entire society's proper definition of sex because you think that there is in legal terms, somebody with an eggshell skull, meaning that somebody who has a pre-existing condition that makes them more susceptible to criticism, that is not a way to run a society. You can't sacrifice truth because some people are going to actually suffer because of the truth. Plus, there's no evidence whatsoever that the suicide rate would go down in the transgender community in any marked way if people just started pretending that men were women and women were men. We're trying that experiment now. We'll find out whether it works. So far, no evidence.
Have you talked to a group of trans people at all instead of this group of like white people?
I'm more than happy to talk to a group of any people who will have me, but usually they protest me.
Okay, last question about your Planned Parenthood thing.
On abortion, Shapiro supported birth control access but opposed abortion, except in extreme cases like rape or incest. He argued that ending a life for convenience is morally wrong.
Yes, because if someone calls me a racist without evidence, they are definitionally a dumbass.
I've been watching you for years now, and I read your book on the arguments to fight against people like me, and I feel bad because, for the most part, the people who have been arguing against you aren't nearly as elegant or eloquent as they should be. But I would just like to ask. So one of your points you very strongly make is that it's unfair for people like me to label you as like a racist or a bigot, just as like a smear tactic. But have you ever acknowledged that maybe it's not a smear tactic, but it's based on things you've said? So for example, on the Israel-Palestine conflict, you called the Arabs. Yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume. Yeah. So you say
I've written several full columns about it.
Yeah.
I've talked about how people don't read the follow-up tweets. I wrote a column.
I've read some of the tweets, and the tweets were just as bad. I mean, you say a lot of things that are just racist, right? But then if I call you a racist, then you defend it by saying I didn't read enough, right? So what I was going to say before.
So give me okay, fine. So give me my racist tweets in context.
Okay, well.
Yeah, you came prepared. So right, go do it.
So you said that Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult day. Well, you before that said Israelis like to build. Did you?
Okay, now the follow-ups, because you said the follow-ups didn't make it any better.
Well, this is separate things that you said.
No. I want
the
follow-ups to that one though.
Follow-ups to that specific.
Would you like me to
tweet?
get them? I'll get them for you.
If you have them, sure. But in the meantime, do you mind while you do that?
What was that?
Do you mind if I continue while you do that?
Well, I'd like to take them one by one. So
sure.
Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we delay that one until the end while I look this up from the podium in front of 600 people?
You've also said. Okay. I'll wait. So on that particular issue, you've also said that the Arab-Palestine populace is, by and large, constitutes the most evil population on the face of the planet.
In a debate, Ben Shapiro was accused of racism by a student who cited his controversial statements about Arabs and Palestinians. Shapiro challenged the student to provide context, asserting that his comments were directed at specific actions, not ethnic groups.
Before you said that you've never brought up religion when it comes to abortion, but I don't think that you've avoided religion when it comes to the Israeli conflict. And I don't know that you can be completely unbiased in the issue, given that,
Well, I can be unbiased on the subject that the Palestinians have elected 3 terrorist governments to form a unity government with the stated goal of the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of all Jews in the area. So that I can be relatively unbiased on. As far as the idea that the Palestinian population... As far as the idea that the Palestinian population is more evil than other populations, they certainly hold more evil views than other populations by poll statistics, by how many Palestinians approve of terror attacks, by how many Palestinians voted for an actual terror group, Hamas, and another actual terror group, Palestinian Authority, and another actual terror group, the Islamic Jihad. Okay, so I don't think that all views are equal, and I don't think that people who hold evil views are necessarily good. I mean, I'm sorry if the polls don't support the idea that everyone is equally wonderful, but everyone is not equally wonderful. Okay, I'm looking up these statements now, so if you'd like to give me a second.
But you've continued, you deny secular Zionism, and you...
Quote, okay, so here, I've got them in front of me. Okay, so I'll finish that one, then we can move. Okay, ready? There are many, many Christian and Muslim Arabs who are wonderful people, just not the ones who oppose Israel in the Israel-Arab conflict. That would be the response within the same Twitter thread. Okay, in the post Israelis versus Arabs, I wrote about Arabs who take part in the Israeli-Arab conflict, as anyone who can read knows. Hashtag dumbasses. Okay, quote, I think it has much more to do with the fact that the Palestinian leadership supported by the Palestinian population uses millions for terror. I should have been more specific. Arabs who actively seek Israel's destruction. Those would be the follow-up tweets. Does that sound like genocidal mania to you, or does it sound like I'm specifically labeling a group of people who have called for Israel's destruction?
I like to point out that you're not a racist, but they're dumbasses, and you're allowed to insult them.
Yes, because if someone calls me a racist without evidence, they are definitionally a dumbass.
What is genocide? Wait. What is genocide? Like so you said that you want to be like Churchill, right? And after the Allies, when they moved the German-speaking Polish out of Poland.
So now you're talking about a column I wrote when I was 19 years old that I morally abhorred and denounced myself. I think 6 years ago.
Yeah,
and have repeatedly said was a bad column that I wrote when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
Shapiro criticized the student for calling him a racist without evidence and referred to past writings to demonstrate his evolving views, rejecting accusations of bigotry.